The following program is produced by CBS News. The news judgments are solely those of CBS News.
Hands across the sea this week were mighty busy hands. The president's brother, Bobby, toured the Far East like a political campaigner, but even more like a Kennedy, freewheeling and fast-talking, and sharing the spotlight, his wife. It happened across the Pacific. Tonight, you're an eyewitness. Your correspondent, Walter Cronkite.
Eyewitness, the drama of big events. Tonight, witness, the Robert Kennedys on tour.
The second most powerful man in American government is Robert Francis Kennedy. As Attorney General, he has been a vigorous administrator of the agencies responsible for enforcing federal law. But as the president's brother and closest confidant, he's the man whose advice has been called for and usually, though not always, followed on practically every big issue from unemployment to Cuba. For the last 2 weeks, traveling through the Far East, he has been received not just as an American government official, but as his brother's alter ego, a fair description of his position and perhaps of the personal impression he makes. The Bobby Kennedy tour of Asia evokes memories of his role in the 1960 presidential campaign. Friendly, informal, full of charm for the well-wishers, but also punctuated by the sound of whip cracking. In Indonesia this week, for example, his words have come variously straight from the heart, straight from the shoulder, and occasionally straight off the hip. Indonesia, one of those impatient new nations that has rushed toward political status while economic welfare has lagged behind. A strong voice among the world's neutrals, a weak and divided chorus in running its own affairs. Indonesia's government, continually threatened by communist rebellion at home, has looked to communist power abroad for help in bolstering its own prestige. This is a prestige-building project, a huge new hotel, and a massive complex of sports arenas to house the forthcoming Asian version of the Olympics, an event to enhance Indonesia's position among her neighbors. American aid remains a factor in the country, but the arenas are the government's pet project, and they are being built with Soviet aid. But the government's latest gesture for prestige is a more ominous one. Its demands for the Dutch-held territory of neighboring New Guinea, a threat that Russia supports, that President Kennedy has tried to restrain. For the visit of the president's brother this week, security measures were strict. Indonesia's communist minority is an unruly one, and our alliance with the Dutch has given it a new weapon in the current dispute with the Dutch. But to the political campaigner, perhaps especially to a Kennedy, opposition is only a challenge to a man's power to charm. And here in the Indonesian capital, Jakarta, the welcome was peaceful, though not huge. Even in the Orient, though, the name of an American president is a powerful talisman. The United States helped liberate these islands from the Japanese. Later, they liberated themselves from the Dutch. The Kennedys are tourists as well as envoys, and sightseeing is part of their schedule. Indonesia is a Muslim country, and this mosque, the largest in the country, is a landmark for sightseers. This, as Mr. Kennedy reminded his hosts, was his second visit to the country. He came there with his brother, then a congressman, first in 1951. As a courier for his brother, the younger Kennedy came with a message about America's position in the New Guinea dispute, a message to be delivered to Indonesia's popular, though often arbitrary, President Sukarno. The United States, he said, is trying to help speed a settlement of Indonesia's long-standing claims to the island, but it wants the issue solved peacefully, not, as Sukarno is threatened, by invasion. Later, the two officials were joined by Robert Kennedy's wife, Ethel. In all Kennedy campaigns, at home and abroad, the Kennedy women have made effective and often strategic appearances. To Sukarno and his impatient people, the president's brother brought firm assurances of America's interests, sympathetic and otherwise, our sympathy with their ambitions, and our loyalty to our allies, the Dutch. A combination of friendliness and toughness that Bobby Kennedy has practiced to the accompaniment of cheers, jeers, and general tumult throughout his tour of the Far East.
Expect more from L&M and get more from L&M.
More body.
More body in the blend.
More flavor.
More flavor in the smoke.
More taste.
More taste through the filter. Get lots more from L&M.
Among L&M's choice tobaccos, there's a special rich flavor leaf. More of this longer aged and extra cured leaf than even in some unfiltered cigarettes. L&M gives you more body in the blend for mellow richness. More flavor in the smoke. Every puff is heartier. More taste through the filter for full pleasure. L&M's the filter cigarette for people who really like to smoke.
Expect more from L&M and get lots more from L&M.
With L&M's modern filter, only pure white touches your lips.
The ancient shrine of Nara is a sanctuary of quiet in the midst of bustling 20th century Japan. But to the Robert Kennedys who began their tour in this country, the quiet was only relative. The aura of America and the aura of Kennedy fame surrounded him on his travels, and so did the Japanese press. The Kennedys' guide's Ambassador and Mrs. Edwin Reischauer. He's a scholar of Japanese history. His wife is Japanese. At Japanese schools and factories, Kennedy was mobbed like a teenager's idol, another reminder of his brother's 1960 campaign. The Attorney General had told his host that he wanted a minimum of high-level ceremony and a lot of face-to-face meetings with young Japanese. He kept inviting them to tell him what was on their minds, and mostly it was Okinawa, the island the United States captured from Japan during the war. They wanted back. Kennedy expressed sympathy, but he said firmly that the international situation requires us to keep it as an air base. In some places, he got their opinions without asking for them, and one of these places was Waseda University, where a vast mob of students was waiting for the Kennedys to appear. Waseda is one of the strongholds of the Zengakuren, the left-wing student group that led the 1960 riots, the demonstrations that forced President Eisenhower to cancel his visit to Japan in protest against the Treaty of Alliance which keeps American bases on Japanese soil. Outside the hall, the crowd was friendly and curious. The students had been excused from classes to hear the president's brother. Inside, though, the extreme left wing of the students' group had prepared an ambush. In the 1960 riots, the students had merely been the spearhead of a sentiment shared by the whole left of center in Japan, the Socialist Party and the labor unions. This disturbance came only from a small communist segment, dressed in their traditional student uniforms. The heckling began almost as soon as Mr. Kennedy started to speak, voices attacking the United States as capitalist aggressors.
I express our deep gratitude for returning so close to us.
Kennedy invited one of the hecklers up to the platform and offered him a chance to speak his piece.
You sit right there. Right there. I don't think so.
It turned out to be a lengthy denunciation of the United States, but eventually the scheduled speaker got in a few words of rebuttal.
And visiting Japan is to get a better understanding of your problems. そして私が日本へ参りました目的は
皆様方の問題をもっとよく理解するためであります。
And to give you some ideas of what the problems that are facing the United States are.
また同時にアメリカが今当面しております問題にいろいろ問題に対してもある程度のことを皆様方が認識していただくように努めたいと思ったわけです。
To give you some idea of what the young people of my country are thinking about.
それからまた私の国の若い人たちがどういうようなことを考えているかということについてもお話ししたかったんです。
Because I would say to you that it's the same problems, that we are facing the same problems that are facing the young people in this country.
皆様方この国がの若い世代が当面している問題と同じような問題がアメリカの若い世代にもあります。
And the solution for all of us is to join as brothers to meet these great difficulties and problems. The age of greatness is before us.
我々の前には偉大なる時代が横たわっております。
And we joining as brothers can meet our responsibilities and obligations and make this world a better place in which to live. I
そして
thank you.
我々兄弟同士といたしまして本当に手をつないでこういうような問題の対処をしてもっと良い世界を一緒に作るという決意を固めたいになります。ありがとうございました。
But the travails of the Kennedys weren't over. Ethel found herself standing too close to a cheerleader who was trying to wind up the proceedings in harmony. The gesture was misplaced. In the case of the Kennedys, family resemblance extends to the in-laws as well. Where the president's wife, Jacqueline, has a demure kind of stateliness, Ethel is quick and vivacious. But both are women of great presence who seem to share the Kennedy trait of self-assurance. In this Tokyo department store, Ethel traveled with the usual escort of photographers. As one of the numerous Kennedys, she did her gift shopping in quantities somewhere between wholesale and retail. Correspondent Peter Callister intercepted her with a few questions.
Mrs. Kennedy, what have you liked so far? This is CBS here, and we just want to get one word on what you've liked most of what you've seen so far.
I think mostly I like the traditional dolls, but they're awfully expensive.
What about the toys?
Oh, I adore the toys. I love the little trains that shoot out the smoke, and they blow whistles, and the doctor, the dentist who drills the poor unsuspecting patients.
How much have you bought so far?
Well, just enough for our children and some of the cousins.
That's quite some.
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much.
No, Mrs. Kennedy, excuse me. Good for you. Oh, I love the one that's lying down.
Ethel Kennedy, 32, has 7 children of her own, aged 2 to 10. Both the youth of the Kennedys and their large family came in for a lot of attention in Japan, where the average family is smaller than it used to be, but where high office usually comes only with great age. At this school in Tokyo, Mrs. Kennedy seemed to know how to handle the young. She wasn't so adept at handling chopsticks, but tea and empathy and gifts from school children, she managed quite well.
Master PC. Wonderful Master PC.
How old are the children that...
It's only 6th grade.
Oh, my dear. There she is. Little girl off to school with an outside. A kitty cat.
The Japanese school of broadcasting, like the American school, dotes on headline personalities. Kennedy's speeches were carried live. Ethel appeared as mystery guest on the native version of What's My Line. Incidentally, they guessed her in 3 moves. And Bobby was interviewed on 2 different networks. Here he was asked for the secret of his success as a president maker, the interviewer's phrase.
Well, you are well known as a president maker. ケネディさんはですね、大統領選挙の参謀長で、大統領製造者として有名なんですが、一つその秘訣を伺ってみました。What is the secret to make a president of the United States?
Secret is having a good candidate and having him run for president.
The international game of politics, and a strictly native sport. It's related to judo.
How about doing it on him again?
Underneath the door, that's fine. Oh, you can get him now.
No, I don't know how to do this.
Poor Ethel, a kind of Lucille Ball of international diplomacy. Aside from the jabs and the pratfalls, there were also some bruising verbal encounters. In one case, over a breakfast of clam soup and dried seaweed, plus crab meat with vinegar and chicken with bamboo shoots. Japanese businessmen and workers expressed concern about measures that would reduce our textile imports from Japan. Mr. Kennedy assured them we aim for low tariffs and freer trade, but told them we were worried ourselves about the competition of cheap labor and our own unemployment problems. In a group of left-wing labor leaders, somebody called the United States an imperialist power because it sticks by the capitalist system.
That makes us imperialist? Capitalistic imperialist? And the Soviet Union puts a wall up to keep their people in this workers' paradise. And they march into Hungary as they did. And you don't call them imperialists? As an amateur in diplomacy, it confuses me.
Of course, the United States has showed some very good results in social security, housing, and these things. But the basic characteristic of that nation is capitalism, isn't that true? For example, the Morgan circles, the Morgan, was it the Power, the Rockefeller, and all of these different...
But I mean, you're talking about what...
This is what I'm talking about.
You're talking about the United States 100 years ago.
No, 100年前のアメリカの話じゃないですか。
Well, do you think we stood still?
そこでもその踏みとどまってると思ってるんですか。
Do you think that the labor movement of the United States?
アメリカにおける労働運動がですね。
Do you think that's run by capitalist imperialists or capitalistic imperialists?
主義者によってその運営されてると思ってるんですか。
I mean, they're supporting President Kennedy. Walter Reuther,
大統領を支持しております。ウォルター・ルーサーだって大統領。彼は資本主義者ですか。
And who's running the United States? Who's president of the United States? It isn't President Kennedy.
支配しておるんでしょう。運営しておるんでしょうかと。
I mean, this is a different country.
これはもう変わった国ですよ。
Now, this is not what Marx was talking about 100 years ago.
100年前に言ってるような種類の国じゃない。
Obviously, there were mistakes made.
その当時は間違いがありました。
And there'll be mistakes made in the future.
将来もいろんな失敗もあるでしょう。
But I mean, to mouth for groups around the world to mouth these ideas about. I mean, that's just gone. That's past age. I mean, we're not run by Governor Rockefeller.
A group of Socialist Party leaders told him they still hope to get Japan out from under that controversial security treaty with the United States in favor of neutralism, and they were against any resumption of nuclear testing.
I appreciate your frankness.
皆さんの率直さを非常にアプリシエートし
And
ま
I
すか
think you would expect the same from me.
ら。もちろん私からもその同じ率直さを期待されるだろうと思いますから。
And you're going to get it.
これから私に申し上げますか
I have been here an hour with you.
もうここでもう1時間も皆さん方と話し合っておりますが。
You have the Socialist Party. You are the
皆様
representative
方
of
は
the
社
Socialist
会党
Party.
を代表しておられるわけですが。
Yet, not one time have you brought up anything in connection with domestic affairs.
一回とですね、今この国内の問題をまだここで持ち上げておられない。
You have not evidenced any interest in what we are doing in the United States in the field of providing a better life for our
例
citizens.
えば我々のアメリカの国民に対して我々がアメリカの国内でもっといい生活を作り上げるためにどういうことをやっているかということで、一回も皆様方は興味を今表明しておられないです。
The fact that we raised the minimum wage
我々
to
は最低
$1.25
賃
an
金
hour.
を1時間1ドル25セントにまで上げたということを一回も言っておられないです。ちょっと待ってください。
Extended Social Security to 5 million more people.
もう500万人
Coverage
以
of that
上に
minimum wage to 5 million more
こ
people.
の最低賃金の方によってはあとさらにその500万人がその恩恵を受けるようにな
Extended
ったという
Social Security.
また社会保障制度をもっと拡張したということ。
The biggest housing bill that's ever been in the history
ま
of the
た
United
そ
States.
の住宅法についてもこのアメリカの歴史改革以来の一番大きい法案が出たと
The
いうこ
efforts that have been made on education so far
また
are
今まで
largely
の
unsuccessful, but efforts that have been made by the
と。ま
United
あ今
States.
まで一生懸命努力をしておりまして成功はまだ大半はまだできておらないですけども努力しているところの教育の改善
What
向
we have
上
done on civil rights
また人権について我々が実施したこと
and many, many other matters.
その他いろいろなたくさんの事項があります。
We make mistakes in the United States,
まあアメリカもいろいろと失敗もします。
and we will continue to make them.
今後もまた失敗するでしょ
It's a government that is run by human beings.
これは
and,
人間が
human beings make errors.
う。動かしている政府でありまして人間というものは失敗をするわけです。
But
過ちを犯
we're
すわけ
trying to do what is best for the people of our
しかし
country.
我々は我々の国の国民のために最善を尽くそうとしておる。
We have absolutely no interests outside.
何をもう海外に対しては外に対して何にもそういうのその利害はない。
The people of Salt Lake City, Utah, or Des Moines, Iowa, or
ユタ州のソートレイク市であろうと、アイオワのデモイン市であろうと、ニューヨーク市であろうと、そういう
just want to live in peace.
この平和に生活をしたいという希望だけであります。
And this government and this administration wants to live
で
in
こ
peace.
の政府もこの政権もそういうふうに本当に平和に生きていきたいということです。
We believe that every country and every people
我々が
should
確信する
determine
こ
their
と
own
は
destiny.
全ての国々の全ての国民が自ら自分の使命を決定する。
Wait a minute, just say that he gave his speech.
今度ちょっと待ってください。Yes, we can understand the American government making a great deal of efforts.
Well, let's say he gets a minute and I get a minute, and then we end it.
それではナイトさんが1分間で私が1分間いただきましょう。
Well, listen, good luck to you.
まあどうか幸運を祈ります。
And have some tolerance and understanding of the United States.
でどうかアメリカに対しても寛容と理解のある程度のものは持っていただきたいと思います。
We don't all have horns.
我々みんなその角を生やしている鬼ではありません。いいとこはよく知っています。 Hopefully also you will have some understanding, adequate understanding about the Socialist Party, and we'd like to talk in the future too together. So we are not just along with the communists as the Conservative Party.
But will you tell them that after this visit I'm going to watch very carefully their public
まあ
statements?
今回の訪問以後ですね、皆様方の公のその声明についてはですね、
Not only
これから非
determine
常に注意深く私
how we can improve in the United States.
我々がそのいろいろとアメリカにおいてその改善できる点ばかりなく、今度はソ連に対してまた中共に対して皆さんがどういうことを言われるかをよく注目します。
You have shown us the spirit of the new frontier, said a reader's letter printed in one Tokyo paper as the Kennedy tour left Japan and headed south. First to Formosa, and then on to Hong Kong, the British colonial outpost on the borders of communist China. It's a city teeming with refugees, swarming with children. At times, it looked like more of a following than even a practiced handshaker had bargained for. From Hong Kong on to Singapore, and then to Indonesia, where he winds up a 6-day visit this weekend, and where he also appeared as a spokesman for the New Frontier.
Men may differ as to what form of government will do the best job. Even with independent governments such as yours and mine, there is no rigid formula upon which all of us can agree. Different cultures, different historical backgrounds, different levels of education, as well as technology, all must have a part in the shaping of an answer appropriate for a time and place. You have a saying in your country, Line Ladang, Line Balang, Line Lobuk, Line Ikan. Another field, another grasshopper, another pond, another fish. Or in other words, each country has its own customs and habits. But the important thing is, regardless of our differences, that we all hold firmly to the belief that a just and prosperous society is possible of achievement. History has proved that a prosperous society, bringing decent living standards, education, and adequate medical care to all its citizens, not to a favored few, is made more nearly possible by men who remain dedicated to the principles of freedom.
Robert Kennedy tirelessly repeated the American story to groups large and small in pursuit of the first of his own 2 aims for this trip, to demonstrate American concern for individual welfare everywhere. His second aim, he has said, is to educate himself. As fast as Mr. Kennedy traveled, he could hardly outrun the speculation as to what other purposes the trip might have. Is this, asked the political railbirds, another step toward the building of Bobby Kennedy to an even greater role than he now holds? Roving White House troubleshooter, perhaps, or maybe an elective office someday. To elect his brother president, he built a powerful political organization. In every branch of government, he has bright young adherents who feed his insatiable thirst for facts. To his vast knowledge of domestic politics, he now is adding a personal acquaintance with world leaders and foreign problems that is probably second to none, except that of our top State Department experts. Our own man covering the Justice Department, correspondent Robert Pierpoint, feels that Robert Kennedy won't step out as Attorney General until he has nailed his old enemy, Teamster boss James Hoffa. But in 1964, he surely will lead his brother's campaign for re-election. And after that, well, newsmen might wonder where they will travel next as they follow the Robert Kennedys on tour. On this first leg, you have been an eyewitness. Your correspondent, Walter Cronkite.
Eyewitness, the Robert Kennedys on tour. Next Friday and every Friday at this same time for the drama of big events, keep an eye on Eyewitness. The preceding program produced by CBS News was pre-recorded. The news judgments were solely those of CBS News. This is Harry Kramer speaking.